What is going on, everyone? Taylor Kyles here for CLNS Media, coming at you with another mailbag. The show, as always, is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. More from them later. Before we start the show, also just want to say really quickly, just for anybody who isn't aware, our beloved colleague Doug Kyde unfortunately lost his daughter in a battle with cancer yesterday. So if you want to help support their family with, just an unimaginably terrible situation they're going through, this is the link to their GoFundMe. We also have it pinned in the chat if you want to support them. Thoughts, prayers, if you can afford donations, I'm sure he would more than appreciate it. And to Doug, we absolutely love you, man. And, you're in our hearts. But yeah, going on to Patriots news. With the mailbag, we had a lot of news break today, especially when it comes to the Patriots vacancies on their staff. You guys had some great questions about free agency, a little bit of draft stuff. And to help me get through these, I had to enlist one of my favorite people on the beat, Zack Cox, to get through all these. Zack, how you doing, brother?
Taylor, I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back on. And yeah, first, just before we start off, I want to send my condolences and my support as well to Doug and all the Kydes. I worked very closely with Doug at Nesson for 4, 5, 6 years. Their family's fantastic. As you mentioned, the GoFundMe link, it's in the chat here. Basically, look up any Patriots reporter on Twitter. They'll have it somewhere on their timeline. There's been a ton of support for that family. They really need it right now. So, I would love for that to keep coming.
Absolutely. So in terms of Patriots news, such a weird pivot, but in terms of Patriots news, going to the report today from Albert Breer, he dropped a lot of really interesting nuggets. Among them, we found out that Shane Waldron was just another name added to the list of offensive coordinators from the McVay tree who was interviewed by the Patriots. Obviously, he ended up signing with the Bears to be their offensive coordinator. But again, very clear what direction the Patriots are trying to go. And it's very obvious they want somebody from that tree. And the McVay, coaching atmosphere is really, it's about communication. As one of the younger coaches in the league, he's really good at getting the players where they're at. So it would make sense to try to get somebody from there. We also heard about let me make sure I get the name right. Gerald Alexander, the assistant defensive backs coach for the Steelers. He also interviewed for the defensive coordinator job. But I'm not sure that's what he was truly interviewing for, because Albert Breer reported that DeMarcus Covington, the Patriots defensive line coach, is currently a strong favorite to actually land the defensive coordinator job. So, Zack, you've been covering DeMarcus Covington for a while. Let me know what you know about him and why you think it makes sense for him to be the favorite to fill that job.
Yeah, I think this would be the obvious move and the best move for Gerard Mayo. DeMarcus Covington makes a ton of sense to fill this defensive coordinator role. He was probably going to have a chance to do it either in New England or somewhere else, either this year or at the very latest next year. He interviewed for 2 jobs in Arizona and with the Chargers last year, got really strong reviews from people in both of those buildings. He's been with the Patriots for a long time now. I believe he joined in 2016 or 2017. And the fact that he was already getting defensive coordinator looks last year, and then he follows that up by spearheading the unit that really led the best run defense in the NFL and had a player within his group, Christian Barmore, who was really, I would say, the breakout star of this Patriots season. Those are 2 things that really just boosted his resume. You also hear a lot of good things from players in the Patriots building about the way that DeMarcus Covington kind of interacts with them and coaches them up. He's a really highly respected guy in that locker room. So it doesn't sound like it's a total done deal yet as of the latest reporting that we've seen, but it certainly seems to be trending in that direction. And again, this would be the obvious move. Keep some continuity there. It does seem like we're going to have some new faces, or we're going to see some new faces on this defensive side of the ball. But to keep somebody like Covington, who's really a rising star in that profession, makes a ton of sense if they do close this deal.
Absolutely. And I know a member of the CLNS family, Andrew Callahan of the Boston Herald, I know he wrote a piece about, what the players felt about Covington, also how he performed as the defensive coordinator from the American team for the Senior Bowl last season. Also got glowing reviews where they say you kind of have to condense the playbook and get guys up to speed really quickly. And there he said he aced that test. Another feather in his cap. And then breakout stars, also Anthony Jennings, obviously more of an early down contributor, but he led the team in tackles for loss or no gain, which is a pretty impressive stat for a guy who's really a role player for them. So DeMarcus Covington, obviously very strong candidate. Would be excited to see what he could do as a leader of that defense. Moving on to the mailbag, though. We got a lot of good questions here. The first one I'm going to throw out. Based on the known interviews Mayo is having, what are the biggest pros of the McVay-style offense? What is the core philosophy of the McVay system? And I actually got a little cheat sheet for us here as well, because I wanted to kind of get a better idea from my own perspective of what this tree does really well, or what the kind of tendencies were for them last season. Very heavy 11 personnel team, also means 3 wide receivers. No one played more. I think they were also the only team to have 1,000 snaps in any personnel grouping. So that's a pretty strong one there. They also like to align with the quarterback and then a running back directly behind them. So relative to the rest of the league, not a ton of shotgun where it's running back to one side of the other. And they love going under center because obviously they really like to have the threat of play action where you turn your back to the defense, help sell it better. Also, trip snub, this is a little bit in the weeds for the scheme junkies like me. Basically, what it means is you have 3 receivers to one side, but they're all wide receivers. And then you just have 1 tight end on the backside. Now, what that does is it gives you a coverage tail, makes it easier for the quarterback to see what the defense is doing. Also, because it's such a rare formation, it's kind of easier to predict what they want to do to you. And then bunches, as we know, the McVay offense really likes their condensed formations with receivers in the same vicinity, makes it harder for defenders to try to make contact and also carry them, sometimes forces them to check into certain defensive roles. Saw that with O'Brien, but they do it a lot more than anybody in the league. And also jet motion. It's a talk of the town in the league, really, for the past few years, where you like to put defenses in conflict by having guys move before the snap, where it forces the defense to communicate well. And a lot of the time, if you look through the tape, it led to a lot of blown coverages there. So from your perspective, Zach, what would you say are some of the tenets of the Sean McVay offense outside of all the stuff that we just listed?
Yeah, I mean, I think you touched on it pretty well there, but the Spark Notes version of what you think of when you think of a Sean McVay offense, it's 11 personnel. They run a ton of 3 wide receivers. It's essentially, I don't know their exact usage rate this past season, but it's far and away the heaviest in the NFL, or at least has been in years past. So 11 personnel, lots of bunch formations, really condensed formations. You don't see it's basically if you flip on the game, you'll see everybody kind of condensed closer to the line than usual. Usually their wide receivers are inside the numbers a lot of times. You don't see them spread the field as much as other teams. And then motion. As you mentioned, they run more jet motion than anybody in the NFL. And McVay has evolved some of these things over the years. The offense nowadays doesn't look exactly the same as it did when they played the Patriots in the Super Bowl 3 or 4 years ago. But those kind of key tenets are still there, as you kind of laid out there with all of those statistics. I think it's been very interesting that 3 of the 4 known offensive coordinator interviews to this point have been from that McVay tree. I don't know if you really want to call Nick Caley from that tree, since he did come up here in New England, but he obviously spent this past season working under Sean McVay with the Rams. And then the 4th is Joe Burrow's quarterback coach. So they're kind of casting their fishing rod in some pretty favorable places at the moment. But it's very clear that Jerod Mayo, in assembling this staff, certainly has a lot of respect for that. I keep saying the Shanahan off, the Sean McVay
it's
offense,
tough.
and what that's been able to do over the last couple of seasons.
Absolutely. I like that you touched on the adaptability and how they've changed over the years. Because one, you think of McVay, and obviously, he's similar to the Shanahan tree because they all came up in that Washington system where everybody just went across the league and just became like the best offensive minds in the game. But it's not the same outside zone scheme that we did see when they played them in the Super Bowl, where that was really what they were known for, and then bootlegs off of that. They ran more duo or man than any other offense in the NFL last season, and the Patriots were second. So I know there's been some talk about, well, would Mike and Nwenu still be a fit? Like, would they have to completely retool their offensive line? Not necessarily, because you can still run, instead of outside zone, where, like the name suggests, you're trying to get outside the tackles, you can run mid zone, where really it looks the same, except for right on the edge where the tackle or the tight end, whoever it is, instead of trying to hook around to get the edge, they're really just trying to push horizontally. And then you want to hit inside the tackles based on how the defense reacts. Mike and Wenu can do that kind of thing. And especially the duo just getting downhill. They also run some inside zone. That kind of thing suits the Patriots personnel right now. I think the biggest thing would be they need to get different receivers. A big thing with, if you're going to go 11 personnel and run a lot, you need guys who can block safeties effectively. Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are two big dudes, and they do a lot of dirty work in the run game. Demario Douglas isn't really that kind of guy. He's probably going to be the type of player that they put in motion, have him a lot on passing downs. Maybe Kendrick Bourne if they re-sign him. He last year was used a lot in that Z role, kind of like a Jacoby Myers, where he does a lot of that kind of dirty work. If Juju Smith-Schuster is still on the roster, he kind of fits into that type of mold a little bit, but obviously, didn't have the best season. We have no idea how that's going to go. They'd incur dead money if they cut him. I think it's like if you trade him after June, it's a little less of a hit. You actually get to gain some cap space there. But yeah, that adaptability in the run game, the pass game, going from Jared Goff to Matthew Stafford, where, Goff is really just trying to attack the middle of the field, intermediate, where Matt Stafford, they opened it up for him and they were like, yeah, man, go out there and sling it. Like Drew Bledsoe to Tom Brady, just have fun and play to your strengths. So yeah, over the years, especially when it comes to the way that they are able to, again, I mentioned earlier, but the way they speak to their players and the way that they really work together. I know Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic, who does a phenomenal job covering the Rams, touched on Nick Haley specifically and how he's all energy all the time. He's a really good teacher. And Zach Robinson, working with different quarterbacks is in a similar boat. So adaptability, communication, and then I would say also, all the tenets that we mentioned scheme-wise. Anything else you got?
Well, just a quick note on Nick Haley. I think he'd be a fascinating candidate for this job just because there were a lot of people that thought he should have gotten this shot either last year or 2 years ago before the Patriots brought in, especially before they brought in Matt Patricia. At that point, Nick Haley had been their longest tenured offensive assistant. It seemed to be kind of percolating toward him potentially getting an offensive coordinator shot at some point. And then that just never materialized for him here in New England. But I know there are still a lot of people in that building that respect what he did here. He would be an interesting blend of that kind of Patriot culture that Robert Kraft still wants to have on this team, and the fact that he basically was able to do kind of almost a study abroad under Sean McVay for a season, kind of gather up all of that intel from obviously the offense that, as you mentioned, is really kind of dominating the NFL nowadays. So don't really know what direction they're going to go at this point, but I think Haley is an interesting name to watch for sure.
Study abroad is a really good way to put it. Also, the ideal, I don't know how possible this is, but if they get Zach Robinson and Nick Haley, just give them better titles, that would be ideal. One thing also Albert Breer did mention is that the Patriots would want to bring in someone who could kind of be a senior advisor to them, because neither Zach Robinson nor Nick Haley has experience calling plays. That's a lot to ask if anybody in their first season with an offense is going to be pretty significantly retooled. So that's another thing to look out for, who they get to fill that role and kind of be a mentor to those guys in some of the aspects they're not used to since they've never been coordinators before.
Absolutely. And I think, we can continue. I think we'll touch on that more in a later mailbag question. So go ahead.
Yep,
we can go to the next one.
Good. All right. This is kind of a fun one. What do you think about Wes Welker at offensive coordinator? If not him, who do you see coming in? So we touched on Robinson. We touched on Haley. Wes Welker would be a very interesting choice. He's learned under some great minds. He came into the league as a coach under Bill O'Brien in Houston, then moved on and worked as a receivers coach for the 49ers. Obviously, in that kind of McVay type system, obviously they went off and branched, did their own thing, but another one of the premier systems in the NFL, and then went off with Mike McDaniel to be the receivers coach for the Dolphins. So, and we also know that he and Bill Belichick had some beef, so he probably wasn't coming anywhere near New England with Belichick in charge. There haven't been any whispers about Wes, but I mean, I'd be all for it. I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I've seen some Wes Welker talk percolating over the last couple of days. I think that it's just there was one of those fake accounts tweeted out a fake report. I think it was like last week that the Patriots were planning to interview Wes Welker as their offensive coordinator, and I think a lot of people took that as something that was actually happening. To the best of our knowledge, that is not happening at this point. He would be certainly an interesting candidate. As you mentioned, his resume as a coach, he hasn't been coaching for all that long. He only got his first coaching gig back in 2017, but came up under O'Brien in Houston, was in the Shanahan system for a couple of years in San Francisco, and then obviously now working under Mike McDaniel in Miami. Also worth noting that he's been Jalen Waddle's wide receiver coach for both of Waddle's professional seasons. He very quickly developed into one of the best rookie wideouts in the NFL. Welker's never called plays to my knowledge. He's certainly never done it in real, actual regular season games. So it might still be a jump from wherever he is now to whatever it would take to become a full-fledged offensive coordinator. But I mean, I think it'd certainly be at least an interesting call for Jerod Mayo, even if you can pull him out of Miami, come back and be wide receivers coach here, and maybe coach up some of the young receivers that the Patriots are going to have. But yeah, I don't think I would put Welker as like the top of my Patriots offensive coordinator wish list at the moment. But if they did want to give him a call, I think that would be an interesting option at least.
Perfect segue for our next mailbag question. Based off the current candidates, who's your ideal offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and special teams coordinator combo? And do you have any concerns about the lack of potential experience on the staff? Because a lot of the guys they've interviewed, I think Tem Lukabu is the only one who's 40 years old that I know of, at least of the candidates that haven't been snatched up yet.
Yeah, the second part of this was what I was just going to touch on the previous question. Because you very well could be going into this season with a head coach who's never been a head coach, or a defensive coordinator who's never called defensive plays, and an offensive coordinator who's never called offensive plays, and all of them might be in their 30s. That's even if all of those guys are capable, and I think Jerod Mayo is very capable. I think this was a strong head coach hire for the Patriots. I already talked about DeMarcus Covington. I think he'd be great in that role. Even still, it's two guys who've never done those jobs before. And all of the reported candidates for the OC job so far have never been offensive coordinators before. I think when you have a situation like that, you need to get somebody in the building whether it's an assistant head coach or a senior advisor or a senior offensive assistant, like whatever his title is. I think you need somebody in there that has had experience at the NFL level. You need like a Wade Phillips for Sean McVay when he first got his head coaching job. Even Vic Fangio now for Mike McDaniel down in Miami. A little bit of a different situation with him because he came in after his first season. But I think it's tough when you just have a bunch of really young coaches who are sort of feeling their way out through this whole process for the first time, and you don't have kind of a experienced voice in the room. The difficult part with that is that Bill Belichick would probably be that experienced voice for Jerod Mayo. He has been for his whole career. And to find whoever that would be, do you pluck him from – do you find a former Patriots assistant who's no longer coaching? Do you find somebody from outside of the tree that you really respect? I don't know who that person would be, but I think it would make a lot of sense to bring in at least one of those types to serve on this coaching staff in some capacity.
Absolutely. Defensive side of the ball, I feel like you're just hoping that Steve Belichick doesn't leave. Obviously, he has all the experience calling plays for the defense. So if you promote him to like an assistant head coach, kind of like senior advisor sort of role, at least you got somebody still in the building who does have that experience. Offense and special teams, that is tough. But one name I've been thinking about, Mike Vrabel. The only coaching connections that I've seen from him are with the Chargers and with the Falcons, who obviously the Falcons, we'll touch on this on the next question. Their situation's a little more up in the air, but the Chargers, I think Jim Harbaugh's been locked in for quite some time. It feels like I feel like the other ones have been pretty disingenuous, the other people they brought in, because there's been so much buzz around it. It's hard to think that's not a done deal. But what would you think about Mike Vrabel potentially joining the team if he doesn't get a head coaching job in some capacity in like an advisory role or maybe somewhere in the front office, something like that?
I think that would be a fascinating possibility. I think that would be a fantastic hire for the Patriots if they're able to pull it off. I don't know if they will be able to. I don't know if that's something that Vrabel would be interested in doing. But as you mentioned, and I know we're going to touch on this more a little bit later, there aren't a ton of head coaching opportunities floating around these days. That list is already starting to dwindle. And you could be left with a situation at the end of this hiring cycle where Mike Vrabel could be the odd man out, and he could be entering an offseason with really no job so far for next year. And if Robert Kraft, who clearly is a very big Mike Vrabel fan, if he's able to sell him on something like that, be like, hey, come in, help the organization. I know how much you loved it here. I know how much appreciation you still have for this team and this franchise. You're not going to be the head coach, but you're going to be something. You're going to have some position of power here. Then you do run into the potential of kind of butting heads between him and Jerod Mayo, depending on how much power that Vrabel does have. But I think that would be if you can bring in someone of his stature and kind of set the parameters properly, I think that would be a very interesting idea. I think it's probably a pipe dream. I'm sure that's what Robert Kraft would love to be able to pull off, to be like, hey, I can just take both of these head coaching candidates and have both of them working for me. But yeah, I'll believe that when I see it, but I do think that that's something that would definitely help the Patriots if they're able to swing it.
I fully acknowledge I'm manifesting. Yeah. I just think that would be so cool. But it may be a pipe dream. Although as these head coaching jobs start to dwindle, it's like, all right, does he want to go to college, or does he want to just come back to a place where he knows he can maybe have some influence and that he's familiar with? It's interesting, but we will see. All right, so we touched on the Falcons. It's starting to seem like Bill Belichick isn't the lock that we thought he was. And this was a good question. Odds that Bill Belichick ends up not coaching in the NFL this coming season feels like 75% or higher at this point. It looked like after that second interview, Bill Belichick going to the Falcons, like done deal. They're interviewing a lot of other candidates. There was Jim Harbaugh, which, anywhere else he's gone other than the Chargers, it's like, all right, maybe due diligence or something like that, seeing what else is out there. But they've started to interview a lot of the other top candidates as well. So what do you think the chances are that maybe he runs out of jobs? Or if he doesn't get the Falcons job, he just says, hey, I'm going to sit this season out, maybe do TV? That might be a little bit. Talking about a pipe dream. That might be a little bit much. Or just sits out if he doesn't really like the opportunities and waits for something better to come next season.
Second interviews too for the Falcons. We're seeing some that I believe it was Bobby Slowick and one or two others that got invitations for in-person second interviews this week. So certainly the further along we get in this, the less likely it seems that Bill Belichick will be the Falcons' next head coach. I think 75% that he's not going to get the job is still a little bit high. I still think at the end of the day, cooler heads are going to prevail in that organization and say, hey, we can hire Bill Belichick. Let's just do it. This is the greatest coach of all time. We're going to not hire him to hire some guy who's never done the job before. So I think at the end of the day, it's Belichick is going to land a job, and it is going to be with the Falcons. But yeah, this seems like something that if it was going to happen, it would have been, or if this was going to be kind of a seamless transition, it would have happened pretty quickly. I don't know if this is some kind of leverage play from Atlanta's side, where maybe Belichick is asking for more than Arthur Blank is wanting to give at the moment, whether that's from a financial standpoint or a power within the organization or a structural standpoint. Yeah. So this may be a case of Belichick saying, hey, I want this job, but I need to have XYZ in place, and this is the only way that I'm going to do it. And this could be Arthur Blank and the franchise saying, hey, we want you, but we only want you under these conditions. So yeah, I agree with your kind of read on the second interview that he had. After that point, it seemed like, okay, well, he's going to go there. Now it's a question of which coaches are going to join him there. But the fact that was a week ago at this point, close to a week ago, and we still haven't had a resolution, it's definitely surprising. And yeah, the longer this goes on, the less likely it seems that Bill Belichick is going to land there. And I do think if he doesn't land there, then I don't know where he goes, because I don't think there are any other openings that really make a ton of sense, either from his perspective or from the team's perspective, or both.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the control inside the organization, because the Falcons already have a good general manager in place. And I know he was at the second meeting. So then it's okay, how much power? Bill was obviously willing to concede power to stay in New England. But Robert Kraft was like, yeah, you can't give someone power, then take it away. That's not really how it works, especially with someone of Belichick's caliber. So is he saying, yeah, I want final say? And they're saying, you can have a say, but you're not going to have final say. And then if we're being very honest, there's also the fact that he's probably not going to be coaching there for more than 3 years. Everyone knows he's chasing the all-time wins record. Maybe he stays around for another year after that, and then he's going to be gone. So from the Falcons' perspective, it's fair to wonder, well, should we invest in someone who we're just going to have to do this all over again in a few years, or should we get one of these young up-and-comers who we can have in our building for a decade plus and really try to build something where we know it's going to be sustained, as opposed to, once again, just kind of having to flip the switch all over again?
Absolutely. And then from Belichick's side, too, it's if the perfect opportunity doesn't arise, which it seems like it hasn't arisen, because if it had, then Bill Belichick would have already been hired somewhere. Right. Is it better to sit out a year and try again in the next hiring cycle? At that point, acknowledging that if you break Don Shula's record, it's not going to happen until you're 74 at the earliest. And then, I mean, Father Time just kind of eventually catches up to you. It's not like he has 20 years of coaching in front of him to kind of get to that point that he wants to get to. So it's a gamble on his part if he really wants that record, which according to all reports he does. Would he be willing to say, okay, I'll accept maybe 85% of what I want in order to have a better chance of getting that? Because obviously if you go a full extra year without getting any more victories, it's probably going to take him, if he gets a job now, it's going to take him at least this coming season, then next season, most likely, unless he just instantly does phenomenal to hit that record. So you're pushing back that kind of celebration date further and further.
And obviously, professional football and college football are not the same thing. With college, there's recruiting. There's a lot more that goes into it. But Nick Saban just retired because he admitted, like, I'm just getting too old for it. Like, for him, it's you got to ask these kids, like, are you going to be around for the next 40 years? And he couldn't promise them yes. And also, at some point, just physically, it's mentally and physically, it's a very taxing job. It takes a lot of time and commitment. And like you said, if he just gets to a certain age where, like, you don't see it coming, it's just one offseason, you're like, geez, I don't know if I have another one in me. That's going to be a pretty tough position for him to be in. We're going to move on from the coaching and the staff stuff over to some free agency questions. But first, quick word from our friends at FanDuel. We'll be back.
Well, the NFL season is wrapping up, but there is still time to get on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's pretty good math, right? That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. Find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. The best way to find popular parlays, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/Boston and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so moving on to some free agency stuff. This was an interesting one that Mike Cadlick and I talked about yesterday, and we were kind of going through free agent options. If it was your decision to pay Matt Judon or trade him for draft capital and use the money to pay a younger replacement such as Josh Allen out of Jacksonville.
It's tough. I think the Judon situation is going to be a fascinating one to watch this offseason because he's still under contract. He's not a free agent, but it depends on how much of a reset the Patriots want to do defensively. Because I think even after the injury, you have to expect that Judon will come back and be one of your best defensive players this season. But he's getting up there. I believe he's going to be either 31 or 32 when this season starts. You're going to have to pay him pretty soon. And I can see the value in trading him and using that money as the question asker here noted to pay a younger player. The issue with that is whichever younger player, if he's going to be a player of Judon's caliber, is going to be very, very, very expensive. And I think you have needs elsewhere on this team where I don't know if you want to go out and put top dollar into a kind of high-end edge rusher. Like Josh Allen is going to make a lot of money on the free agent market. So I don't know. It's a tough one. I would probably say no in this situation. I think I would keep Judon, but it's not a lock by any stretch. I think if you're writing out the Patriots 2024 roster in Sharpie right now, Judon is not one of the players that I would have penciled in there as like a stone cold lock to be on this team next year.
Absolutely. And with his role especially, it's tough because if you get a replacement, it's someone who's going to have to play on every down. Because Matt Judon, he's known as a pass rusher, obviously, and the Patriots pass rush really fell off a cliff outside of Christian Barmore when he got hurt. But he's also, I think last season he kind of dipped early in the season, but he is one of their better run defenders. And he drops into coverage, like he does a little bit of everything. But at the same time, like you said, he's getting up there in age. You don't know what that situation is going to be like or how much he's going to want to get paid. Is he willing to take, acknowledge that he's an older guy coming off a significant injury and be like, all right, I understand. I'm probably not going to break the bank. Or is he going to say, nope, my career is coming to an end. If you're not going to pay me, I'd like someone else to. And one, I think, thing that we can't overstate is the impact he has in the locker room. Like, he was still around even when he was hurt. The energy, like, I know it definitely felt a little different when we were doing interviews and being in the locker room without Judon, because he's just such a magnetic and outgoing personality. So that's going to be an interesting little issue that the Patriots have on their hands, where it was easier to kind of give him a little bit more money last year, but especially with the injury and another year, it's going to be very tough. But good question. All right, besides players on expiring contracts, which others might be cut or traded and showed the door in the offseason? So obviously probably going outside of Judon for this one.
I think Lawrence Guy is an interesting name there. He's getting up there in age. I believe he might be the oldest player on the team now, assuming that Matthew Slater retires as we all expect him to. He was a surprise cut candidate last year, just given where his contract is. And now kind of a year further down that line, it wouldn't surprise me if that ends up happening to him at some point this offseason or this summer, especially if the Patriots get some more youth on that defensive line. And the really interesting one is David Andrews. I think I would bring David Andrews back, especially with all the upheaval the Patriots had on their offensive line. He was really the only constant in that entire unit. He played 100% of offensive snaps, was obviously a captain. I think he was the only really consistently reliable leader on the offensive side of the ball. So if I'm making those decisions, I'm bringing David Andrews back. And again, he is under contract. But the Patriots did draft essentially his replacement, or who they hope will be his replacement, in Jake Andrews in the 4th round last year. 4th round pick. It's a significant draft investment. This isn't a guy they picked up in like the late 6th round. Jake Andrews didn't play a ton this season, but did show some flashes late in the year when he was able to get on the field at guard. I'm sure it'll depend heavily on how ready they feel Jake Andrews is to whether they feel okay with parting ways with David Andrews. And also they need to build up that kind of leadership structure around the offense that Jerod Mayo talked about in his opening presser. So again, not somebody that I would advocate getting rid of, but I do think that he's an interesting one to watch as they go through this whole process here.
Like you mentioned, for those offensive leaders, it was Andrews and Hunter Henry, who's a free agent.
Yeah.
2 players that he listed and then kind of gave an awkward, like, oh, yeah, but, the quarterback, whoever it is probably going to have to lead too. And it's like, gotcha. I guess for me, I would say the receivers. Like, I think that room is going to probably it's really hard to say. You'd think that they're going to gut it out because of how bad it was. Devontae Parker and Juju are at the top of that list, the guys who just did not live up to their contracts. But you signed them to bad contracts. You extended Devontae Parker after what was admittedly a very good summer. I know from the outside it seems strange, but watching him at camp every day, it's like he's catching at least one deep bomb for Mac Jones every single day and looked like their true wide receiver one, where even the other guys were saying, like, yeah, we're all wide receiver ones, but like, it's probably Devontae. But then you see the on-field effort, the lack of production. He looked better with Zappe, but even with Zappe, you saw like the interception against the Bills where he kind of floats his route up and allows Rasul Douglas to get in the window. I know that the receivers seem to like him. Like on social media, you always see them calling him Unk, and I feel like he, fits in with them really well. Also similar with Juju, I think there's a lot of respect for him. But in terms of what they give you on the field, I just really don't know if they're worth the contracts, but you also have to find a trade partner after the deadline if you want to not incur a ton of dead money on those deals. And then it's okay. You already have money, or you just trying to do a cultural reset and move on from them anyway. I don't really know where they go. It's just a bad situation with guys that I don't know who's going to want to trade for them and take on that money anyway. And then I'd kind of throw in J.C. Jackson as well, because the Patriots added Alex Austin and Marco Wilson at the end of the season. Now, Alex Austin is an exclusive rights free agent, so not a guarantee to come back, but most likely usually see those guys, they figure it out and get them back on the team. But JC won, obviously, all the issues that happened throughout the season. He did not finish the season due to mental health reasons. I'm not including that in this equation, but the on-field play especially, where it was at least once a week, you're seeing him bust a coverage or give up a big play where it's not even like John Jones, who every once in a while will give up a big catch, but he's right at the catch point, or it's like he's playing off coverage and it's a 15-yard out or stop where it's, yeah, on the stat sheet, it doesn't look good, but watching it, there's not a lack of quality of play. With JC, it wasn't that. He had some okay moments, but there were too many lapses. And with the depth that they managed to acquire towards the end of the season, you got Isaiah Bolden coming back. You got, obviously, Christian Gonzalez coming back. I just don't see how you justify how much he's supposed to be making when you can cut him, save all that money. And maybe if you really want to, you can re-sign him on a cheaper deal because he really has zero leverage. His reputation is probably shot right now, especially considering he didn't have the rebirth in New England. A lot of people thought that he might have. So I would say Devontae Parker, Juju Smith-Schuster, and J.C. Jackson are my guys who are really on watch.
I mean, JC is a great one. I honestly even forgot that he was in this category because I would be shocked if he was on the team this year. Just especially shocked if he was on the team for the current contract that he has. Because I think the Patriots can save right around $13 million by cutting him. I think that's a no-brainer just for all the reasons that you laid out. Maybe if you want to swing around and try to get him back on a cheaper deal and kind of give him a second or third chance here, maybe that's something that they potentially explore. But yeah, I can't possibly see him being back for the current value of his deal. I feel like even during the season when he was playing well, there was probably not a very strong chance that he was going to be on that same intact contract going into the following season just because it was so inflated. And then with the wide receivers, I'm curious if we see something similar to the Jonnu Smith trade involving one of the two, maybe Juju, where it's essentially just, hey, give us a late 7th round pick and take this guy's contract from us. Yep. Because both of those guys, they've been productive players in the league. It hasn't worked out for them. Certainly this season, both of them are massive disappointments. But maybe there's another coach around the league that says, hey, yeah, we'll take a flyer on this guy. We've got some extra cap space. Why not? Sure, here's a 6th round pick. So I think that's a situation that the Patriots will probably explore at least this offseason because, as you mentioned, cutting especially Smith-Schuster would be a lot more detrimental from a financial perspective than finding a trade partner. And the most interesting thing about all this is that it's kind of a new regime, but it's kind of not that's making all of these calls because obviously you have a new head coach, but at least as of this point, the people running the personnel department were the same people that were highly involved in the personnel department last year. It's basically going to come down to whether the kind of the viewpoint of Matt Groh and Elliot Wolf strays significantly from what Bill Belichick ultimately wanted because he was the one making these final calls in the past. So it's a weird situation to try to handicap because it's not a completely new deck of shot callers here, but all the people who are in charge did not have the final say in the past. So you don't really know how they're feeling about any given player.
Yeah, not even mention the fact that they're both guys with a lot of tread on their tires who are consistently hurt. So there's another hoop you got to jump through. Just pray that whatever team you're trying to sell on Juju only watches the Steelers game. It's like, look, he still got it a little bit. And only the Bailey Zappi Devontae Parker tape. All right, moving on. With cap space this offseason, would you rather see the Pats take chances on low money risk guys or splurge for big money guys or even trading for high price guys on other teams? Personally, I think the balance has to be there. Like, you just don't only have to spend a lot of money. I think you still want to have that Patriots type of philosophy where you get good guys in the middle of your roster who can really fill it out and play big roles for you. It's just, it can't be like 2021 where the guys who are making all the money for you are 2 tight ends who aren't as dynamic as they're being paid and then a nose tackle. You just have to spend the money in smart ways and not give out bad contracts. When it comes to trading for high price guys, don't give up your draft capital. You're in prime position right now, hopefully a position you will never be in again in terms of having picks in the top 5 of each of the rounds. So, yeah, for my money, I don't really want them trading for anybody unless I can get a great receiver for like a 2nd round pick. Don't give up that number 3. It's way too valuable. And then, again, in free agency, send out some big money deals for players who deserve it, but make sure that you're not just spending money to spend money.
Yeah, they can't piece it together the way that they've tried to for the last couple of years. Especially on offense, just the nickel and dime kind of moves. They worked in the kind of dynasty heyday when you had Tom Brady to smooth out a lot of the rough edges. They haven't worked in recent years. They especially did not work last year at wide receiver and at offensive tackle. You need to bring in some actual, real, legitimate kind of star level NFL players. Again, you don't need to go out and kind of get the top of the market guy at every spot and blow all your money on those guys. You still need the kind of middle to bottom tier of your roster to be strong, to be competitive. You can't just kind of say, hey, we got these 3 kind of $20 million a year guys and then nothing else behind them. Obviously, you still need the roster building strategy, but I don't think that they're in a position where if they are expecting to compete this year, at the very least be a playoff team in 2024, I don't think they can go about it the same way that they did for the last two off seasons, and especially this past off season, where you say, hey, we have a gigantic hole at right tackle. Let's sign 2 backups and draft a guard in the 5th round. Like that's just not a viable strategy anymore. And Jerod Mayo, based on his public comments, at least so far, seems like he is willing to kind of lead the charge of, hey, let's go spend some money and get some dudes. We don't know if he's going to be the guy having the final say on that. He probably won't be, but I'm sure his voice will be loud and listened to by whoever is the one who's ultimately making kind of that final phone call there.
I'm so fascinated to see what we get out of the Matt Groh and Elliott Wolf era. Because 2 guys where Elliott Wolf, he has enough of a background where I can be cautiously optimistic, came up in 2 pretty good front offices, especially with the Packers, obviously, and his dad. Nepotism exists in the NFL, we know it, but it doesn't always mean it's not justified. Look at Steve and Brian Belichick. But then Matt Groh, we really have no idea how much of, the Patriots player acquisitions and departures were on him and Belichick. So that'll be really interesting to see. But speaking of some of these big name players, any chance we get any of the free agent wide receivers or all the big names getting franchise tagged? I actually have a list from our friend of the show, Brad Spielberger with PFF, who did a top 10 list at every position. Well, let me get that up so you can actually see the entire thing. There we go. So, Zach, which of these names most fascinates you? I will say I think the top 3 names on this list are almost locks to get the franchise tag. Maybe not as much Mike Evans, but Higgins and Pittman, I feel like they're never even going to touch the open market.
Yeah, I think as it says on that list, T. Higgins is the number 1 guy in agency. But, yeah, based on everything that we've heard, seems like he is most likely going to be franchise tagged by Cincinnati. Maybe that changes. Maybe he does hit the market. If he does, I think he would be the ideal addition for the Patriots, just based on what they've lacked in previous years and what they need now. Going a little bit further down that list, there's not a ton of bring a guy in and he's going to be your number 1. Yeah. Right. I do like Calvin Ridley. I like Calvin Ridley a lot. I know the Patriots had interest in him when he was coming into the draft, because he was coming out of Alabama. He had all those connections there. I remember being really surprised when they brought him for an official visit, because they're like, well, they're not going to draft a receiver in the 1st round. And here, Calvin Ridley, they have
makes too much sense.
But yeah, but I think he's a guy that would make a lot of sense. Probably not a bring him in. He's an instant, no doubt, kind of Pro Bowl caliber receiver. But I think he's a guy who would really help them. Marquise Brown, I'm much more lukewarm on. I don't think he's somebody that makes a lot of sense. He's a productive player. He's been a good player in the past, but he's got the injury history, the size there. It just doesn't seem like something that would really fit what the Patriots are looking for.
Kind of feels like an overlap with Pop a little bit, right? In terms of the electric slot guy who's kind of undersized, but I think Pop is tougher than Marquise in some ways, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And then everybody else in the bottom half of this list, I think would be, Tyler Boyd's been a good player for a while. Gabriel Davis, I know, has been pretty hit or miss, underwhelming since his breakout a couple of years ago. Michael Thomas is a million years old, can't really stay healthy. I think the Patriots should do everything in their power to get one of those top 3 guys on this list. If any of them hits the market, obviously Higgins being the real prize of the whole group. But as you were saying, it does seem like there's a strong to quite strong chance that all 3 of them might not even hit the market. And to get them, you would have to work out some kind of a trade.
Yeah. One thing I really think they need, whichever free agent they get, is someone who can really lead the room and set a good example, and also somebody with significant playoff and hopefully Super Bowl experience. So for that, Mike Evans is like the creme de la creme. Obviously he's got the soft tissue injuries, and that's just been nagging him for years now. As we saw, he'll drop some easy passes, but he makes too many spectacular plays, where your brain just completely forgets about the ones that he drops. It's like, oh yeah, he's still Mike Evans. That makes a lot of sense. Obviously, playoff and Super Bowl experience. Tyler Boyd is kind of the closest in terms of that, where he's been to the Super Bowl. Very highly respected in the Bengals room as well. I know they just love him there. So not as a difference maker, Tyler Boyd, but I would like him in the room as kind of maybe a Z rotational slot with Demario Douglas, who you know is always going to be available, find the space in zones, just find a way to get open, be a really reliable target for you. Darnell Mooney is interesting. He's another guy who's kind of slight of frame, or not Tyquan Thornton, but he has kind of Tyquan vibes where he's that skinny guy who's got a lot of speed, but I think he's a much better route runner. Still not a big difference maker. So I really think that probably Calvin Ridley is the only one on that list. I actually passed on him when we did our top 10 of our wish list yesterday, but I watched more of the tape. I thought drops were a big problem for him because statistically they are. Looking back, honestly, it wasn't as bad as I thought, and he's still got the ability to like threaten vertically. He still just stops on a dime in incredible ways, adjusts to the ball really well. So if we're talking realistic options, I feel like it's Mike Evans and Calvin Ridley, and then just a bit of a decline there.
I think Mike Evans, the rationale you laid out there is really makes a lot of sense. Kind of, if you view this as sort of the new era of the Patriots offense, having him as kind of the centerpiece of the new Patriots passing game, even though he'd probably only be here for a couple of years, he is a guy that's getting up there in age, but he's been phenomenally productive for a decade now. What does he have, like 8 straight 1,000-yard seasons? Yeah, I think that even though you probably bring him in, you're not going to get peak first team All-Pro Mike Evans, but he's still a very, very good player. And would give the Patriots something that they just haven't had in years now.
No, I agree. All right, last one before I get you out of here. We have to touch on the draft. So the second round could be a very important pick, and some recent mocks having 7 to 8 offensive tackles going in the first. What should the Patriots strategy be if all the top tackles are taken? Frankly, I don't know that all of them will actually be gone because this is such a ridiculously deep class. And also in these mocks, like sometimes – just guys slip. There's some position where you think it's loaded, and just because another position there's more depth, or teams feel they have needs elsewhere. Like, especially when you're locked in, like especially for the Patriots, you're locked in on offense. There are plenty of teams in the league who really need help on defense. There's a lot of good players on that side of the ball as well. But I will say personally, I still think you got to get a tackle with that second round pick, just because if you wait till the third round, you're probably not getting somebody who can play any significant number of snaps for you. And unless they sign 2 free agents, like, we don't really know what the situation is with Trent Brown, whether it was really like a Belichick thing where he just didn't like the way he was treated, and maybe it's a little bit better with the Mayo regime where, like you saw, he was posting about Mayo constantly, didn't even acknowledge that Belichick left. So clearly he likes the change in head coaching there. So maybe he comes back if you re-sign Nwenu. That is a little different, but I really don't know what they're going to do. So if they don't address the position significantly in free agency, I feel like you still have to get the best player available at tackle with that second pick. If not, trade it back into the first towards the tail end to get somebody before they get snatched up.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that last point there. If it is a situation where you've got to run on offensive tackles and you really view a drop-off between a guy that's going to go at like 25 and whoever's going to be available in the second round, I think that's definitely a opportunity for a trade up there. I think a trade up would make a lot of sense for the Patriots if they end up in that situation, because if you do use that number 3 overall pick on Jaden Daniels or Drake May or whichever quarterback is there, which is what I would advocate for at this point, you really need to get a high-end tackle very early in the draft. I think either later in the first round or early in the second. It's worth noting and worth everybody keeping in mind that the mock drafts today are not going to be the same as the real draft in a couple of months. We haven't even had the Senior Bowl yet. We haven't had the Combine. We haven't had any of those kind of pre-draft milestones. And especially for a position like offensive tackle that a lot of people, a lot of casual fans just paid zero attention to for the last, 6 months of the entire college football season. This is where you see names start to emerge. Obviously, the Joe Alts and the Fashanus and the really high-end guys have been household names for a while, but there's going to be some tackle from a random like Sunbelt school that goes out and blows up the Combine and turns himself into a first or second round pick. That happens every year, especially at those more obscure positions. So when you're looking at exact kind of saying, oh man, the Patriots have pick, whatever it is, 34, there's not going to be a guy that falls here. The whole landscape is going to look very different in a couple of months once we go through this whole process. But I am with you there, though. I don't think this is a position that the Patriots can afford to wait on, no matter who they have at quarterback next year. They can have Patrick Mahomes back there, and if he was playing behind the tackle situation that the Patriots had this year, the Patriots still aren't going to have a successful offense. So I think that needs to be a very high priority. It's why I see the potential benefit of a small trade down, draft someone like Joe Alt, then get a quarterback later. Still not what I would do at this point. I think getting that high-end quarterback is just so important. But that's why I can see the rationale behind it, because it's been a hole for several years now. And no matter who's behind center there, you need to get that fixed. And obviously it gets harder and harder to do the longer you wait.
And they still do need weapons. So it's tough to say, okay, yeah, like give up capital to get back. But if you see there's a run on good tackles towards the end of the first round, you just got to read the tea leaves and be like, all right, we got to be aggressive and get our guy. If there's someone where they're like, they'd be a great fit in our system, day one starter. Yeah, I really do think that unless you do start to see them start to trickle down, if you see that run, you got to be aggressive. Zach, thank you so much for joining us again. Always appreciate your time. Please let the people know where they can find you. And if you got anything good coming down the pipeline, we should be looking out for it.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, on X at ZM_Cox. Workshopping a new Twitter handle. I kind of hate it nowadays. I may change it. There's a shocking number of Zack Coxes out there in the world, so most of the good ones are already snatched up. But yeah, not sure what exactly is next at this point, but keep an eye out. I'm sure we'll have something coming down the pike in the next couple of months here.
Once again, thank you so much, brother. And thank you all, as always, for watching. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. We will see you next time. Peace.